everyone, my name is Sabs.
And I'm Sabrina.
Welcome to Zero Calorie Marketing. Today we're joined by Alain, who's the founding partner and head of strategy at House of Kaizen.
We learned a lot from Alain today, like how he'd love to be a tennis player. Just kidding.
And at the tender age of 17, he went to study at New Orleans University.
Alain does teach us some sound advice, like how to learn to fail, as well as how sports cars are not welcomed in the Caribbean.
And the reason may be more surprising than you think.
Let's begin.
So Alain, why don't you start by introducing yourself?
Sure. Alain Portman, originally from Chile.
I told you. Yeah.
Moved to the US when I was 17 years old. In the year 2000, the bubble burst. I was in New York, moved to London for safer grounds. And I've been in London ever since. And I joined the digital marketing industry in 1998. So it's been a while.
Okay, great. I was doing some stalking on your LinkedIn. That's how I found out you're from Chile.
Okay.
So I just wanted to know, tell us about your childhood and how it was like growing up there. And then obviously your move to the US, and obviously that changed at such a young age.
Yeah, so Chilean mother, Swiss father, so kind of the opposite spectrum of emotion, drama, Venezuelan telenovela, compared
European.
with European icebox, very considered. So I kind of grew up in a mix of both. Chile was a wonderful place, but it felt very much like a racing horse. And racing horses are beautiful, but the problem with a racing horse is that they have their eyes covered, so they can see only one way. And that's one of the reasons why I moved from Chile, because I realized that while beautiful, it was incredibly comfortable. And I think one of the things I've been trying most of my life is, successfully and unsuccessfully, is to get continually stay out of the comfort zone. But it was a wonderful. It was interesting politically, because Chile during that time was in a dictatorship, Pinochet dictatorship. So there was limitations in terms of the press. There was limitations of movement, and I was graduating from high school when the plebiscite occurred in 1989 that brought democracy to the country. So it was an incredible time to be in that country. But yeah, it was memorable.
I can imagine.
Yes.
How was it like when you first moved to the US? Was it a big culture shock?
Yeah,
It's terrifying. I'll be honest, I cried for the first 3 weeks every day.
Wow.
And
were you there alone or with
yes.
family?
I was 17 years old, and I moved away from something that was very protected and idyllic to New Orleans, Louisiana. And New Orleans is a city, beautiful city, but it's a city of debauchery, right? A lot of drinking, a lot of partying. So, I grew up very quickly. And it was, my parents on the other side of the phone. Because it was still the days where I had to go to a payphone to call my parents. They said to me, no, you're going to stick it out. So it was a lesson in kind of, you know what? Yeah, things might go wrong, but eventually you'll come out it the other side.
Okay.
So you had to sort of grow up very quickly and be responsible for yourself.
Yeah, I went from not knowing how to even boil an egg to kind of have to look after myself completely. And along the way, I made some serious mistakes. I mean, I got a credit card because, it's America, right? Credit is readily available for college students. So I learned about finances the hard way. So yeah, it was a wonderful way of discovering, and I tripped over my own shoelaces a lot of times, but yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you have any kids, but would you send your child to have the same experience as you?
Yes. I don't have any kids yet, but I definitely would, because college for me was not only about learning and getting a job, but my God, it was about discovering the world and and making a lot of mistakes.
Do you still have any friends that you've kept in touch with?
Yeah, I have a friend from Bolivia.
Oh, wow.
And obviously, Chile and Bolivia don't have the most friendliest relationship because of the War of the Pacific, where things happen. But we struck a friendship because we were both South Americans in New Orleans, and I still go back to New Orleans because to me it's a very grounding. So anytime I need to check myself or I lose perspective, I go back to two places. I go back to Santiago, where I grew up, was born, and then New Orleans, because those are two sort of emblematic places for me. It reminds me of where it all started. So.
Interesting. And when you were at university and studying, did you have an idea of what you wanted to get into, or was it just like go with the flow?
No, I tell this as, it's a very true story, is at the age of 14 years old, I knew I wanted to work in advertising.
Oh, wow.
So I never had the question of what do I want to do, what is my professional future like. I knew exactly what I wanted. I told my father I wanted to work in marketing. And he told me, what, you're going to go to university to be a salesperson? I said, no. It's wider than that. And marketing was just becoming, a 4-year degree. And it was wonderful. And that passion for marketing and advertising, I think, came from the idea of being able to understand consumer behavior. So why the hell do we do what we do? And advertising, in a way, is a way of influencing that for better or for worse.
Does your definition of advertising from when you got into it to what it is now, has it remained? What does advertising mean to you?
Advertising is giving people choices relative to services and products. I remember having a conversation, I still do these days, about is there an ethical responsibility related to advertising? Should there be limitations? Of course there is, but I am a true believer that consumers are not idiots. We need to assume that consumers are knowledgeable, and at the end of the day, no advertising, we all have free will and the ability to make choice. And to me, advertising is also a wonderful way of providing people options, of giving them different perspectives. But I think it's interesting that advertising sometimes gets a bad rep. And at the end of the day, advertising is a reflection of a country and a culture. You look at advertising in China, it reflects the Chinese culture. If you look at advertising in the United States, so it's almost like you put a mirror against your own culture. And I think people have a real problem with that, because advertising is sometimes they see things that they don't like about the culture that they live in.
So would you say that you take elements from the places that you've lived, the cultures that you have within you, the things that make you who you are? From Chile, you've lived in America, in the UK, and you incorporate that all together and you put that into your work.
Yeah, and I think I learned, being able to combine South American culture with American culture with European culture, it's really taught me about understanding the person on the other side of the table and how they conduct business. But at the end of the day, you could argue a consumer is a consumer. What makes a consumer different in each country is the cultural requirements and the biases, and that is very that's very delicate. But I think diversity is a requirement in advertising. You can no longer, and you asked me about how it's changed since I started to today. It's become far more diverse.
It has.
And it's increased the requirement for people to bring in a diverse mindset to the table when they put forward advertising solutions.
100%.
I know you mentioned advertising or marketing was something that you wanted to do from when you were very young. If you could do anything else apart from marketing, forget the last 20-something years of your career, what would you have gone into?
Tennis player.
Tennis player?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I still love tennis. Tennis for me is a place where I just forget everything, and I just go at it, and it's liberating. And yeah, I didn't have the talent, and this is an interesting subject because I gave at House of Kaizen yesterday I gave sort of a workshop about how to become a good manager. Because I think one of the challenges in our industry is that almost nobody I've ever met has been trained on how to be a manager. We kind of all learn through experimentation, right? But it's so important, right? Yeah. So if you believe that your largest asset is your people, but then you go, no, we're not going to train our people on how to be managers. The point was brought up about talent versus effort, right? And I think the challenge with advertising in society today is that it only focuses on talent. So we seek talent, we seek those magical sort of instantaneous moments, and we forget it's effort. The challenge, back to my tennis story, was I didn't have enough talent. I did have the effort, but that effort would have required sacrifices that I wasn't ready to make. Because there was things that were more important.
Cool.
Yeah, I think you can sort of apply that to many things, even in work. It's what you put in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And effort,
and
practice. And I think, it's almost, the idea that, you don't need talent to be successful.
You can work hard, but it's how you work.
Yeah. And also, I think the difficulty with a talent-based mindset, given I was born with this is so natural to me, is that it drives a very fixed mindset.
Yeah.
And it doesn't allow you to fail, because if you say, I am talented, and you fail, where do you go from there?
Exactly.
What else do you have?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I ran out of talent. What do I do now? Right.
Yeah, the book that you mentioned, Carol Dweck was the author.
Yes, mindset.
She says you should never praise children on, oh, you did something great. It's more, you should always praise them on, you worked really hard. Absolutely. This is the hardest working person today. So you give them this element of being able to change something versus something which they are naturally achieving just because of who they are.
Yeah. Or
because of some random combination.
Exactly.
Of talent or luck or environment. I think I watched the TED Talk, which she did, and where she spells this, where you should always praise anyone, a sports person, not an amazing goal, more like you worked so hard to get your goal, which is a variable that you can change versus something that you just purely out of luck achieved.
But this is the thing, right? We, as a society, we venerate entrepreneurs, and we should, because most entrepreneurs achieve something that the average person maybe is not able or not willing to do. But everybody's interested in the success, but nobody's interested in the difficulty, the hard times that took to get there, right? Yeah. We want the Disneyland movie, but we don't want to see the revisions of the script and the script. And that unfortunately creates this idea of sort of instantaneous success, which is, relating it back to managing people, it's difficult. Right? If you have a generation of people that's growing up being, all I need is talent, how do you manage that in a workspace?
It's, like the end result is celebrated, whereas the process is really ever spoken about.
And it's the process that matters, because the process can be repeated. Yeah. And the process can be modified.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And speaking of things like this, when like, let's say tough situations arise, or let's say referring back to work specifically, how would you as an individual deal with like adversity or doubt in your sort of work life or even personal life?
Because I guess for you to coach your team members, you can say to them, work on your process, but how do you apply that to yourself?
Yeah, you guys raised a great point, which is, in order to be trusted and to be relevant, believable, the element of is this person believable? Is you need to be a practitioner of what you are saying. Right? And I think the biggest, and it's something that I continue working on every day, is learning to fail. And learning to fail is something very counterintuitive, because we are always taught the opposite by our parents, in school, in university, by our peers, by our jobs. You are here to succeed. Actually, no, I am here to learn how to fail. And the thing is that failure comes in different, there's a spectrum of failure. It is not a single event, and there's generally 3 types of failure that people look at. One is preventable failure, failure that is attached to lack of effort, lack of focus, and that's the effort that actually most people focus on. That type of failure. Then you have the failure type to process complexity. You're doing something that is so complex, and the example in the corporate world is the lack of process, the lack of integration, and the individual isn't necessarily responsible for that, but failure, and that is sort of a mid-level degree of failure in terms of its degree of red at the top, green at the bottom. And the last one, which is sort of failure, type of failure, is discovery, which is experimentation. And, for example, we are in the business of helping clients improve the customer experience by using things like experimentation, conversion rate optimization. And the team is obsessed with green tests, meaning we want tests to show growth. And every time they get a red test, there's sort of this silence. Oh my God, we failed. And the culture that we've hopefully been trying to build is, let's understand why it failed. Did it fail because we expanded the boundaries and we're trying to innovate? That's great. If we failed because we just didn't work hard enough. And this is the other thing, is also managing people's expectations. If you think about my personal life, one of the biggest things I'm still learning on is managing my own expectations about myself. There's a lot of philosophers that would say that the reason for unhappiness is unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
Right. Expect nothing, and everything you get will be a gift.
A bonus, yeah.
Yeah, and it's obviously easier than done, because we all carry these things that we bring from our childhood and our upbringing. So you kind of have to reconfigure yourself as an adult. But I think those 2 things, which is learn to fail and manage my own expectations and my peers' expectations.
It's really interesting.
Going away from this, what does the film Moneyball mean to you? We did research.
Moneyball, I think, is one of the most wonderful movies. It demonstrates how scientific method can be applied to anything. Right? And I wrote an article, thanks for picking it up, about how Moneyball and the use of economics in sports related to programmatic trading. And one of the most fundamental benefits of it was the ability to say no. So Moneyball talks about this idea that at one spectrum you have this traditional way of identifying talent and opportunity in the baseball sector, but you can apply that to anything. Yeah. And it was using the anecdotal experiences and these scouts that had 20 years of experience. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have Moneyball, which is using data, moving away from instinct into actual data analysis and data modeling to identify not resources of opportunities at their peak, but opportunities before they hit their peak. So if you're a sports franchise and you can identify the next Michael Jordan when they are young, you don't have to pay them $100 million for a 5-year contract. And you apply that to the industry, and it's still, intrinsically it's given, programmatic gave the industry more control. The problem with programmatic is, unfortunately, it got tainted by the issues of transparency. Right? You look at surveys and consultancy, different sources about what are clients, brands' perspective of programmatic. They go, I love the granularity, it allows me to say no, meaning I can buy specific audiences and individuals. What do you do not like?
Yeah.
One, the lack of transparency, and two, the complexity tech-wise. But I think Moneyball is a great example of the ideas of learning to fail that we spoke about, and also managing your expectations, because there's a beautiful human story in that as well. When you take away the method and the thinking of this character Beanie that actually realizes that he achieved what he wanted, but did that necessarily make him happy?
I think there also needs to be a balance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. I mean, and the difficulty with balance is finding it and keeping it. Right. One of the things I talk to my team about is, we all talk about high performance teams, high performance cars, high performance everything. Nobody talks about consistency. Right.
Maintaining.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I look at somebody like Federer and I go, I take my hat off because you've been at the top of your game consistently. You haven't been a one-trick pony. You haven't, you've done it over and over and over and over and over. And that is incredibly difficult. It's not sexy, but it's quite commendable.
It is.
We use Moneyball I've interpreted that film in a different way as well.
Oh, really? Nice. What's that interpretation?
So, in terms of how we identify potential clients, we just like you actually. It sort of not changed my view in life, but it had a very big impact in the way I saw things. Like you, I didn't understand baseball at all, so it took me a while to get used to this idea of what is this about. But I understood the philosophy and the idea behind it, and the trust in data and numbers. And unfortunately, they didn't win the championship that year, but they went. I don't think no one's ever achieved the win. The number of wins in a row or something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
And after that, I think the season after, all the teams clocked onto it, and they copied the idea of using data, and then everyone had
it revolutionized the industry.
It changed the game in a way for them.
And that's a legacy, right?
And for anyone to be able to change something like an institute like that is amazing.
Yes.
How we tend to use Moneyball in our approach is with everything actually, with how we identify potential clients. So we look at, there are some companies that every business wants to be, let's say you're a B2B or a B2C company. You want to be attached to the Nikes or the Adidas or the sexy companies of the world. Whereas we tend to look for companies who have a lot of value in terms of they have a lot of potential and they have a lot of, essentially, they have a lot of potential that we can see and including things like they are going to grow, or they've grown a certain number in the last 2-3 years. We know that they're going to need this before they know that.
Nice.
And also, it gives us the advantage because no one else is looking at them, because they are, I don't know, one of our first ever clients is they're an email automation company. They're based outside of London. They have cash to spend, but no one talks to them because they think, they don't appear in anyone's radar, or they don't appear in these kind of lists. So I just messaged the CMO directly saying, "Hey, how's it going?" And
Nice.
he just replied back saying, "Yeah, good." I was almost surprised because it's as if they weren't used to companies approaching them.
Yeah, sure.
Or, I had done my research and I said, look, you've done this, these are what your competitors are doing, and I think we can really add value by doing X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
He knew that I did my research, so he was like, okay, let's go and talk, and it turned out, at that time, it was one of our biggest deals. And it was just using this kind of idea of, let's look at things under the radar.
Yeah.
One, it gives us a competitive advantage, but two, if you can see things from a different perspective that no one else does, then you've got something there.
Yeah.
And I use this approach consistently in terms of, we found a makeup brand that was selling £400 million worth of makeup a year, but they didn't appear anywhere because, one, they don't have a central London location.
Yeah.
They're not like established kind of L'Oreal's or
Sure.
all these kind of sexy names, but they were doing some serious numbers in terms of sales.
Yeah.
And I was like, hang on a second, I can just message the founder of the company directly. To my surprise, he messaged me at like 5:50 in the morning. He got up really early. He's like, oh yeah, let's have a conversation, talk to this person here. And I just messaged him back straight away. I was like, yeah, I can come in and see you tomorrow. And I went there, these guys were spending 100K a day on Facebook advertising alone. And they were like, yeah, we want to listen to what you have to say. Let's do this.
Yeah.
And no one else is talking to them. And I was like, wow, this really is something here. And I just invested more and more time to this.
It does make a lot of sense. I mean, your business tends to be quite sometimes ego-driven, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's chasing the big brands because of the recognition.
Yeah, so that Moneyball had, when I was researching you, I was like, oh, this guy is a fellow Moneyballer. I don't know if that's even a...
The book, I mean, what do you think? I mean, to me, the book is far better than the movie, but...
I have read Michael Lewis's few other books, like Big Short.
Okay,
that's a really good book.
Big
and
Short, yeah.
I'm reading Flash Boys at the moment.
Okay.
And again, he looks at things from a very different perspective.
Yeah.
And he makes something which is very, who would want to know about how fast your internet connection is going to be versus, he puts things in a way which got my interest,
Yeah.
I was on a flight and I was like 80 pages in before I even realized, I was reading this book.
Nice.
So yeah, that, I'm a big fan of his work.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did you get into behavioral sciences?
So
Where did that all start from?
that all started with my favorite class in my entire university course. And it actually took me 5 years to graduate because I partied too hard in my first year. For the record, and
We'll blame it on New Orleans.
Yes, blame it on New Orleans.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this, do not send your kids to New Orleans. I had a class. My favorite class ever was by a teacher called Rahim Mehta, and it was consumer behavior. And it was, to me, almost like somebody had given me a treasure, and it was mesmerizing. And I read every book he gave me. I went to every class, and that was the spark of this sort of search for knowledge about consumer behavior. So, for example, we're sitting here in WeWork, right? And there's a reason why WeWork uses tokens as opposed to real money. It's not only because it's simple, but there's a psychological effect, which is the token effect.
Yeah.
Do you know that every token in WeWorks has a monetary value of £20? So if you know that a meeting room is going to cost you £40, that changes your behavior versus if I said to you, it's only 2 tokens.
Yeah.
That simple application and just repositioning, effectively repackaging something that is £40 into 2 tokens, that to me is the magic of consumer behavior and understanding how. And traditionally, a lot of people talk about behavioral economics. Right? Behavioral economics is incredibly relevant in marketing, especially when you're looking at lifetime value or elements like that. But there's a more basic, raw side of consumer behavior, which is really understanding why do people react the way they react. And when you're in the business of experimentation like we are, is everything we test has to be backed up with a reason tied to the consumer psychology.
Okay.
Because if it isn't, then can we truly say that we're optimizing the customer experience, or are we just optimizing to client metrics? And there's a lot of BS in the industry about, yes, we all focus on customer experience. My view, and it's quite rigid view, is that unless you are looking at consumer behavior, attitudinal, behavioral, you are not doing consumer experience. Right? If you are not backing up your hypothesis and your experiments with that, then you can't claim to be doing customer experience.
So what is one of your greatest marketing campaigns, advertising campaigns you've ever accomplished?
That I've been part of?
Yeah.
With behavior science.
Yeah.
Oh,
that you've been part of.
we had a relationship with ABIS Budget Group for a very long time. They were probably one of our founding clients, and it's a brand that honestly I still use as a consumer. And we did some research around during the summer period in the Caribbean, in St. Lucia, St. John's, to understand the relationship between cruise ships and car rental, because we saw a correlation, right? And it's an obvious one, right?
Yeah.
People take cruises and they arrive at a port, and they need to travel somewhere. Our hypothesis was that, well, we need to promote convertibles, right? Sunny islands, sunny destinations. We ran a campaign, display ads, landing pages, all tied to the beautiful convertible. You could see the imagery, right? Yeah. The beautiful mountains and the sea behind you, and the flowing in the air, and the freedom, the hands in the air. We've all seen that stock photography. It bombed.
Oh,
wow!
And the insight was the psychological insights that then led to behavior was the idea of commonality. And if you imagine, people spend days in a cruise ship. There's nowhere they can go, so they make friends with other people in the cruise. When they go island hopping, they don't need a convertible. They need a people carrier.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was that moment of, oh my God.
Yeah.
Fantastic insight by applying and trying to understand behavior. So, as opposed to, and it drove a different variation of the campaign, which did incredibly well. And the very fascinating thing, which taught me a lot, was we then went to the regional marketing director, and we presented this, and he went, excellent results, but we've known this for a while. We're like, how come? Well, all you need to do is look at the fleet utilization. The fleet that is most highly utilized in the island are people carriers. The convertibles just sit there waiting to send them somewhere else. So it was a wonderful moment of, oh my God, we've used research to identify consumer behavior to shape a campaign, incredibly successful, but the penny dropped in terms of pragmatism. Right. So, probably the most successful campaign in terms of, because a lot of people talk about we applied insights and we changed things. And I'll be completely honest, do I have hundreds of campaigns that have done that really well? No. It's really difficult. But that's probably one of the most significant in terms of the fact that we could demonstrate linear attribution to an insight to an actual campaign, to actual cars moving off the parking lot.
Interesting.
I love these kind of, whenever we work with a company that does, like, sells physical goods, you know, I love getting involved in these because you can actually see something being moved from one place to another, or something being sold, or a conversion. Whereas a lot of the times we tend to work with tech companies, and it's
on the cloud, right?
It's in the cloud, yeah. And then we're like, you know, they would say, oh, we got this conversion rate, and it doesn't mean anything.
Yes.
Unless, you know, whereas someone's like, oh yeah, you know, that thing that you did, we sold this many of it. I was like, yes.
Yeah, you can imagine, you know, the post office having to ship these things, or people having to move these.
Just gotta visualize downloads or uploads.
Yeah, we did this thing for a men's shaving brand, and they were like, there was a small company, it's like 5 people, and they were like, yeah, you know, we actually were really surprised because we did some A/B tests on the call to action, and they were like, we tried out loads of different variations, including slight changes to the copy, offer, blah, 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 blah. And they were like, of all the things, this is the copy that worked best. And then I was like, why? Well, you know, they said, we found that the older demographic was very reluctant to take out their credit card and purchase, so they needed to have this kind of element of safe, or, you know, we're reliable.
Sure.
Reassurance. Whereas the younger guys wanted to see how good the quality of the razor was, so that way they're able to have the latest product, you know, without compromising the quality.
Yeah.
They were used to buying things online, so they didn't have an issue with taking out the credit card and purchasing.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have known unless we tested this. So
that was it's the value of experimentation. And I think the biggest issue that we face in that sector, because experimentation you can apply to many fields, but if you're in the business of optimizing through multivariable testing or through A/B testing, actual experiences to acquire or retain customers on a website, on an e-commerce website, the issue you have is many brands they want long-term results, but they take a short-term view.
Yeah.
Which is the most frustrating thing. And it doesn't matter where you sit. Vendor, agency, clients, you all sit around the table. If you sit all around the table, you all share the same problem. And the problem is short term, which is, it's not only about budgets being allocated on short term, it is, I need these results to make my quarterly numbers. But this is a 2-year plan, roadmap. Oh, no, sorry, we're going to have to change it after 6 months because our new... And now the feedback I get from some brands that we partner with is, we need you to be nimble. My response is, you need to be consistent. So we need to find a middle point. Because, unfortunately, you know, short-term goals are important because of, you know, I guess the types of businesses that we work with. But there's also a need to have a longer view. The issue is, I see it almost like what happens with prime ministers and presidents. They don't have enough time, marketing directors, CMOs, to actually make significant change. If you're only in that role for 2 years and 3 years, and you're going to cash in your pension and make a lot of money with your stock changes or your bonuses, you're not going to be thinking about the future, are you?
Unless you make yourself president for life.
Oh, there you go, right?
That's, you know, like this. I was talking to a consultant, and she was saying, look, you can almost pinpoint the moment a founder has sold or left or been fired from the business to how the company performance drops over a long-term period. Yeah. Because only a founder would have a very long-term view, and they are unfireable in a way.
Correct.
Within reason.
Yeah.
So often there's a correlation between the founder of the business who actually set it up, leaving the business, and they get in a managing director or CEO who has been incentivized for short-term bonuses or short-term goals. The moment that happens, you have 2 different ideologies or philosophies of action.
Correct.
And companies optimize for maximum profit within the shortest amount of time versus, you know, like Steve Jobs left, company went down, he came back, and, you know, he got him back into a, you know, a better state. Yeah. I mean, you know, like you could say WeWork, which is very pertinent as we're in WeWork building. Adam Nauman has left or resigned or has been asked to leave, whatever that may be, and they've brought in 2 managers, and I'm very curious to see how this is going to pan out for us personally, but also for WeWork as a company.
It's a different, forget about the different objectives. Right? Maybe they're going to focus, they should focus more on their core business, but the culture of the organization will change. And that is significant.
Yeah. And speaking of leaving and starting, you started ARC Science, right?
ARC Science.
Yeah, yes. You started that yourself.
Yeah.
Where did you get the idea from that? And then how did you transition that into House of Kaizen?
Yeah. So actually, House of Kaizen started as Web Liquid. Oh. And it started in 2003. Okay. It was started by me and my existing business partner, which we worked together for 15 years. And we worked both at agency.com. Agency.com back in 2000 was the largest digital agency in the world. We had 450 people in London. It was a wonderful place to work because everybody was still trying to figure out what was going on. Long story short, we left. We felt that we could do this ourselves. Yeah. And my view was, what's the worst thing that can happen? The industry will have me back. And I still believe that. I still believe that if you have a passion, if you've developed experience, if you've developed good relationships, and you work hard, whatever industry you work with will have you back if you choose to try your entrepreneurial. So we started with Liquid, and then we realized that we needed to evolve into something more because we quickly got into performance marketing. So clients were asking us to deliver on CPA targets, cost per acquisition targets or volume targets, but we realized we didn't optimize. We didn't have control over the client's websites, which is bonkers. So we actually went and we funded a startup, and effectively it was House of Kaizen 1.0. And the early stages of A/B testing and conversion rate optimization, which is now experimentation, which is now the big House of Kaizen, was that. Okay. ARC came and I'll be very honest, it came completely opportunistically. Okay. Was it visionary? No, it wasn't visionary. It was simply me looking at the marketplace and going, this programmatic trading is a real opportunity to expand our client base, improve our margins, and take a different view to the industry. The industry was going very hard into the non-transparency. I mean, nobody went into a meeting and said, well, I'm not going to give you transparency. They just didn't give clients that option. And I always talked about one thing, and I still do, is in this industry, I'm not interested in transparency. I'm interested in disclosure. If you work on a basis of disclosure with a client, the issue of transparency never becomes an issue. So again, as an industry, we are focusing on the wrong problem. We should focus on disclosure. Disclosure has far more economic value than transparency. So ARC came from that opportunity, and as the programmatic industry evolved, and it is very different to what it was 4 years ago, we shut ARC down. We basically put it to bed. And it was opportunistic in the fact that it lasted 4 years, and it gave us the opportunity to experiment and generate some good revenue and learnings from that. And we had no problem with looking and going, that's it. Let's leave at the top of our game.
One couple of questions. How did you end up from New York to London?
I had through a friend of a friend. So I was working at Wunderman Cato Johnson, which is now called Wunderman. It's evolved. And I was in New York, and I reached out to the London office through my boss at that time, and he was kind enough to put me in touch. So I got an interview at Wunderman in London, close to Camden, that beautiful Art Deco building. And I also, through a friend of a friend, I got an interview at agency.com running the British Airways account. And I was very fortunate to have worked in the digital division of Young and Rubicam, which is called Brand Dialogue at that time. It was Young and Rubicam's first attempt to develop a digital division team. And I'll tell you guys a story about how I got that job, because it's a good story. And yeah, they put me in touch, and I got an interview with one of the directors at agency.com because of my experience with United Airlines, which was a client at Brand Dialogue, which I was lucky to work with. Did I ever imagine myself working in London? No. And I came to London truly because I was afraid for my professional career. I was being sponsored, right? Because I'm not an American citizen, I'm Chilean and Swiss. So I was being sponsored, and when the bubble burst, it was the right move, because a lot of my colleagues lost their jobs within 3 months.
2008?
2000.
2000.
Yeah, that was the big wipeout. That was a true .com bubble burst. What we saw in 2008 was more affecting the financial sector, but .com, the 2000 bubble burst was, that was harsh.
Yeah, we've had a few guests who actually also lived through that and survived to tell the tale. From my understanding, this is Toyota's 1% improving methodology.
Yeah.
Why is your company called House of Kaizen?
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Where did you get the name from?
So we we believed in this idea of growth, right? And the ability to grow on an ongoing basis, repeatable, right? Back to my idea of consistency, right? The values of the company are very much about innovation, but also about consistency. So there's always something that drives us forward, but there's always something that gives us a foundation, something as a strong foundation. So Kaizen, when we sat around and we went, okay, what do we want to call this new organization that sort of came through the merger of WebLiquid, House of Kaizen 1.0, and then an American agency. I can remember we were not even in a room, we were just standing all in a room and sort of exchanging ideas, and we started talking about the ethos and the principles, and the word that keep coming up was continuous, repeatable, continuous, repeatable. And we looked into the idea of Kaizen, and the idea was originally Kaizen because it's the idea of continuous improvement, and we love the idea because we believe in sort of continual growth of continuous improvement. We're in the business of experimentation, and the word house came as a need to make it more like a family. Okay. And I still think of House of Kaizen as my second family. We have something called the Time Machine, which is actually a live cast sort of experience where everybody who's ever worked at the agency has a feature. When you join the agency, you can go through every person who ever joined the agency. And it came out naturally. It wasn't because we thought, it's going to make us a cooler indie agency. It just came naturally out of maybe the values that we brought to the company.
So where do you see House of Kaizen in the next 10 years, and where do you see the industry going?
Ooh, wow, that's a big one. I would say that the industry, unfortunately or fortunately, so I say fortunately as a consumer.
Sure.
Am I concerned about privacy? Not really. I think a lot of the issues around privacy are led by a lack of education. And I think as an industry, we haven't done a great job of talking to the average person who doesn't know much about the internet. And there's a wonderful thing. There's a wonderful psychological effect that occurs that I kind of constantly find myself trying to remove, which is, I call it the curse of knowledge. If I don't understand something so well, I have difficulty explaining it in simple terms. If you ask a brain surgeon, how do you perform brain surgery? They have a very difficult time explaining it in layman's terms because of the curse of knowledge. Yeah. And I think the industry suffers of a curse of knowledge. Some people say, well, it's riddled with jargon. I think the issue with the industry from a personal perspective is, and the professional perspective, is that there's going to be more limitations on data. And the advancements that we've made as an industry really come from the ability to be more accurate and be more meaningful. It even through devices, through our communications, through the services that we offer. But those limitations are going to be partly driven by legislation and partly driven by a consumer backlash, are going to limit the scope of the industry. But the wonderful thing about this industry is that the industry finds a way of reinventing itself. And I think we're going to go back to more traditional ways of targeting and more traditional ways of valuing consumers. This obsession that most clients have around personalization and unique IDs. There's a lot of legislation that make user IDs an impossibility, right? And if you're in the business of helping clients enable, you better have a solution, a plan B. The problem is that the plan B, back to my point about learning to fail, and sometimes you need to take 2 steps back to move 3 forward in the future, is some people in the industry will say, oh, that's a step back. Well, it's actually maybe the step that the industry needs to take to kind of reassess. Where is House of Kaizen going to be in the future? It's very difficult to operate as an independent, and that's being very frank and being vulnerable, right? And saying it how it is. The life of an independent agency in London is difficult. And I have one main reason for it is, as an industry, we have failed to demonstrate the value of what we do to the wider economy. And unfortunately, what happens is too many agencies are willing to literally drop their pants and do work at a loss just to keep revenue coming through the door and hit their targets. The problem with that is, if you are large and if you have a lot of cash flow, it's like a siege. You can sit on the top of your castle for months and months and months and win accounts and lose money for a year. You can invest. As an independent agency, you can't. So if the industry is being commoditized by price, and it's also being driven by this sort of value-based pricing, and pricing in the agency in the industry segment, to me, is it's a whole different podcast conversation, which I would love to have with you guys. But we're trying to find better ways of aligning our cost structures with the objectives of the clients, because things like media commission don't work anymore. It's a broken model. Clients don't want to work on retainers anymore because it's a dirty word. We're doing a lot of proof of concept, right? We put some skin in the game, they put some skin in the game. So to answer your question, where is housing going to be in 10 years? I think we're going to be in partnership with somebody else. Okay. I do not see us being an independent for another 10 years. I honestly don't think it's possible.
Just moving on to, and also wrapping up, I guess, like the last 2 questions. What's been the best business decision you've ever made?
Wow. Best business decision I've ever made.
That's a good one. Maybe it's yet to be made.
Oh wow! I'm going to say that it's yet to be made. There's nothing that really. Yeah, I just don't want to say something that doesn't feel.
Is it like a combination of a lot of things that have come in at the same time, which has been like almost like a series of decisions that led to that, rather than one?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the psychology of how we remember things. watched this wonderful show about sort of how the mind works in Netflix, because I ran out of entertaining stuff to watch. I watched every series, and it talked about how memory works and how the way we remember things has nothing to do with the actual events. We just create these memories, and it's really difficult because I recognize that a lot of these emblematic moments, these key moments, are somewhat manufactured in my mind. But I would say it is a combination. To your point, there isn't one decision that I know this made it. It is truly. It's only in hindsight that you can go, oh my God, like a chessboard, right? Yeah. Because of that decision, this happened. Because that happened, this happened.
It's ever growing, I think.
Yeah, and I think if this idea, and it's also with your personal relationships, right? We all find ourselves with the partners or not because of decisions that we made in the past. And there's kind of beautiful. There's a reason for it all. Yeah.
I think last question. What advice would you give to someone starting out in the industry?
Yes. Be courageous. I told you guys about how I got my first job into digital marketing. I actually, the day that AOL bought Netscape, and now I'm kind of aging myself, right? I'm giving my age away. But that was a huge moment in the industry where AOL, at that time an ISP, bought a browser. It was like, oh my God, this is wow, everything will change. The next day I wrote a letter to the head of the digital division of Young and Rubicam, John Kaiser, who is still, he's one of the industry leaders in the United States, and great, a real figure of the industry, and a lovely man as well. He came over to my cubicle, and I sent a letter internally through these memo bags, right? Because we weren't using email at that. And he knocked on the cubicle, and I turned around and went, "Yeah, hi." He goes, "You Alain Portman?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Hi, I'm John Kaiser. I'm the head of brand dialogue. I read your letter. Interesting. And I also spoke to your boss, Carl Freeman. And Carl Freeman was my mentor. So I've already had a chat with him. Why don't we go grab a coffee?" And that's how it happened. And so my advice is be courageous, right? Be proactive, be courageous. That's number one. Number two, learn to fail, right? Because as we discussed, the best learning comes from failure. And it hurts, it's uncomfortable, you feel bad about yourself, but eventually it pays out. And then the third is find yourself a mentor. Incredibly important, because there's so many distractions, there's so many things, and the one thing that you want to have at the beginning of your career is focus. Maybe you don't know what you want to do day in and day out, but you need somebody to help you focus. And then the last one is find a purpose larger than yourself. And the reason for this, and I'd say this from experience, is across your career, you will go through experiences that are going to hit you. And if you don't have something that is driving you beyond yourself, you won't make it. Right? And that purpose could be visionary, like I want to change the industry. I want to increase the education of this industry. My vision was I want to change this industry. And it's one of the reasons why, House of Kaizen, we've gone through some difficult times. Like a lot of independent agencies have. Most years have been wonderful, thank God, but we've had bad spots. And if it was all about me and my entrepreneurialism and my own success, trust me, I wouldn't be sitting here. But my purpose was larger, and it is still larger, which is to try to shape the future leaders of this industry. That would be the advice.
Great.
So how can people get in touch with you? If anyone listening who wants to reach out to you for advice or...
Our final question.
LinkedIn. I'm a pretty active LinkedIn user. Also, feel free to drop me an email, ALAIN at House of Kaizen. That's KAIZEN.com. Really happy to help and to provide perspective to anybody, especially if you're joining the industry, because you know what? I feel like I have a responsibility for shaping this industry, because it's sort of the responsibility that comes with becoming an entrepreneur in this industry is you need to pay it forward.
Yeah.
And so if I can provide advice, if I can provide help, then yeah, just reach out.
Great.
Cool.
Thank you. This is the start to our rapid fire questions. Would you rather have a beach or city break?
Beach.
Card or cash?
Cash.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
Morning, noon, night?
Morning.
Pepsi or Coke?
Ooh. Pepsi.
Interesting. Okay. Favorite TV show of all time?
Seinfeld.
Ah, interesting. Okay. Who would play you in a film?
Benicio del Toro.
Favorite place you've ever been to?
It's got to be Costa Rica.
Ah, okay. What is the strangest thing you've ever eaten?
Grasshoppers.
Grasshoppers.
Wow.
Okay. What is the last book you've read?
Mindset.
Mindset.
Can't remember the author.
Was it good?
Incredibly good.
What is your biggest addiction?
Fitness.
Okay. What is the most interesting thing you own?
A stamp collection.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
wow. That is quite interesting. What is the most used app on your phone?
City Mapper.
Ah, yeah.
Same.
Yes.
What was one of the most spontaneous things you've ever done?
Moving to the United States for college.
What sport would be the funniest to add a mandatory amount of alcohol to?
I don't know if it's a sport, but cheese rolling. In Gloucestershire, they have a cheese rolling championship.
Okay. Yeah, that could be quite interesting.
That would be.
Yeah.
I think people usually are already drunk.
Yeah.
I think I kind of have to.
Yeah. Okay. In one sentence, how would you sum up the internet?
Wow. Joyful.
Okay. Would you rather be 10 minutes late or 20 minutes early?
20 minutes early.
Okay. And what is your proudest achievement?
Having built House of Kaizen.
Nice.
Great. Okay, and that is our rapid fire questions.
And that's a wrap. Be sure to check out some of our other episodes.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.